Well, I'm here again with the annual event with Lauren Sheets Jarrell from the American Tort Reform Association, giving us the latest, this year's listing of the top judicial hellholes. Thank you very much, Lauren, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Always happy to talk with you.
Absolutely. Hey, let's start off with the basic question for those who haven't joined us in the past, and I trust they have a good excuse, but hey, what is or how do you define a judicial hellhole, Lauren?
Judicial hellhole are places across the country where lawsuit abuse and misuse of the court system is the norm. They have civil justice environments that starkly contrast the rest of the country, and they look to expand liability at every given opportunity.
And with regard to your list, annual event, what do you look for? How does it go about? And what is it that you use to determine the label judicial hellhole?
So we're monitoring court systems across the country for a full year. We're analyzing decisions and we're looking at outlier decisions, maybe where they've broken from the mainstream, they've expanded liability unreasonably, or there's just a very unfair treatment of defendants. And so that's how we compile this list. We also look at state legislatures as well and look to see the types of bills that they're proposing. Are they proposing novel theories of liability that haven't been considered or enacted elsewhere? Are they looking to unfairly burden small business with new private rights of action? So we take a look at both the court systems and the legislatures.
Sharon, it's the time for the big reveal. Let me share my screen here.
So here's this year's list that was released on December 6th for the 2022-2023 judicial hellholes. The big news in this year's report is that for the first time in the history of the report, Georgia is this year's new #1 judicial hellhole. Their civil justice system, unfortunately, has been deteriorating over the past several years. However, they were catapulted to the top after a series of nuclear verdicts, most specifically a $1.7 billion verdict against Ford in the fall of 2022, in a case that had several ethical questions, biased opinions. So that is what sort of propelled them to the top of this year's list. At #2, we have the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, up a few spots from last year. Then at 3 and 4, we have California and New York. And while those two jurisdictions have dropped from recent years, it is due in no part to any reforms or developments on their end. It's just simply a reflection of the severe abuses occurring in Georgia and Pennsylvania. At #5, we have Cook County, Illinois, home of BIPA litigation abuse and no injury class actions. At #6, we have South Carolina asbestos litigation specifically. The asbestos litigation is handled in a way that starkly contrasts how it's handled around the country, and they have a judge down there who is very plaintiff friendly. #7, we have Louisiana. And at #8, we have St. Louis. And St. Louis has been dropping down the list for the past few years, thanks to some reforms passed by the Missouri legislature. However, the St. Louis courts have been hesitant to implement those reforms. And so we continue to call them out for not following the state laws.
Yeah, a couple things, Lauren, from what I read in the executive summary. Louisiana, shout out to my friends Randy Guillot and to Doug Williams on revealing the planned accidents down there, the intentional accidents down there. A lot of courage on their part and a lot of effort. So I think that's been one of the big achievements that they've been able to do down in Louisiana, is to show that these are staged in many instances.
Yes, that's been a multi-year investigation that we've been following closely. There was a very large conspiracy undertaken to defraud the insurance industry and the trucking industry, and they've done a great job, really. They've done a great job trying to get to the bottom of it. I think the problem is that Louisiana's civil justice system was set up in a way that allowed those abuses to occur. And so they need to continue to enact reforms to prevent something like this happening again in the future.
And another one is #2, just like their beloved Phillies, is Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the Court of Civil Common Pleas in Philadelphia. But one of the big things I think that is often overlooked when we talk about the courts is not just the decision making, but is their power over the rules. And you talked about that with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court with regard to the med-mal change. And for those of us in the trucking world, it has as much, if not a larger impact on us when you can bring an action anywhere someone does business.
Yes, that was really disappointing to see the Pennsylvania Supreme Court take that unilateral action and get rid of their venue rule. One of the main problems that we've seen in recent years in Pennsylvania is their expansion of both jurisdictional laws, allowing out-of-state plaintiffs to come into their state and use their court system under any circumstance, and now to allow them to then change the venue rules to allow them to bring cases in any county court that is most likely going to be the most plaintiff-friendly. And they even received recommendations from legislative branches not to do this. There's a real concern now about the increase in costs in insurance and driving access to care and driving out doctors out of the state, leading to a crisis in care for patients.
And one of the things that stood out to me in the executive report, because I think we talked about it last year as well, is New York, the concept of anchoring and how that is impactful there.
It is. They're allowing plaintiffs' lawyers to anchor, suggest large damage awards, and that becomes sort of the starting point in the jurors' minds. And there's been psychological studies done showing the impact that this has and how it dramatically increases the damages that are awarded at the end of a trial. Nuclear verdicts are a big theme in this year's judicial hellholes. States like Georgia, New York, they allow this anchoring practice, St. Louis, and that has really led to these massive verdicts that we haven't seen over the last decade.
All right, we can move on. The watch list.
The watch list.
What are you looking for?
So on the watch list, we do rank these jurisdictions. And we're looking for those states, maybe they've taken steps off of the judicial hellholes list, so there's improvement occurring, or they have unfortunately made some advances towards becoming a judicial hellhole. And so we're keeping a watchful eye on these states and court systems to see where they will be next year. At number one, the top of the list is the Florida legislature. The Florida Supreme Court and the state of Florida was a number one hellhole just a few years ago. But thanks to Governor DeSantis's leadership and the Florida Supreme Court, they've made great strides towards improving their civil justice system. However, the Florida legislature is still refusing to pass some substantial reforms that are very necessary. This week they're starting a special session to address the property insurance crisis. And we're encouraged by what hopefully will come out of that session, but more needs to be done specifically in the area of transparency and damages, phantom damages, and reforming that so that the damages are more accurate and don't provide windfalls to plaintiffs and their attorneys. At number two, a newcomer this year is New Jersey. Over the past few years, the New Jersey Supreme Court had made some very positive, had issued some very positive decisions, favorable and fair. However, they now have this trifecta for the plaintiff's bar that could really lead to the perfect storm. The New Jersey Supreme Court has had several justices cycle off, and so the governor there is able to appoint some new justices that will most likely be left-leaning, lean towards liability expansion. They have some new leadership in the legislature that is very plaintiff-friendly. And the governor really doesn't see a need for civil justice reform. So we're concerned about what will come out of New Jersey in the coming year. And then at number three is the Texas Court of Appeals for the 5th District, which is in Dallas. It's a state appellate court. And they have refused to apply both state precedent and U.S. Supreme Court precedent. They've been overturned several times by this Texas Supreme Court. Thankfully, that has been able to happen in some instances. So we've just been concerned by their by the opinions that are coming out of that court and how they differ from Texas law.
Friends,
Trends. So as I mentioned earlier, these are sort of the three trends that we really saw appear in this year's Judicial Hellholes list. Number one are these nuclear verdicts. We define nuclear verdicts as damage awards above $10 million. They're usually driven sky high by the non-economic damage award for pain and suffering, which is, sort of an intangible number that is driven up by the practice of anchoring, which we discussed. We've also seen a lot of serial plaintiffs filing no injury lawsuits, and that ignores one of the most basic tenets of tort law, that there's a claiming of an actual injury. We specifically see this with the Biometric Information Privacy Act litigation in Illinois. We see it with the food and beverage lawsuits in California and New York. These plaintiffs aren't suffering any real injury. Maybe the the bag of potato chips could have had another potato chip in it. And these plaintiffs' lawyers are making millions of dollars off these cases, while consumers really are receiving pennies, no real benefit. And then we also see it in the space of American Disabilities Act litigation, with serial plaintiffs targeting small businesses, claiming accessibility issues when they really had no intent of visiting those properties. And it's been a really impactful area of litigation for small business. And then finally, these hellholes have an open door policy for third-party litigation financing, a predatory practice that is a driving factor behind the nuclear verdicts that we're seeing. It's preying on the vulnerable, and it's really causing issues and leading to more litigation abuse in the hellhole states.
That would make a great topic for a separate video, Lauren.
Yes, it would.
Lauren, thank you as always so much. Appreciate it, the annual visit, and look forward to talking to you again.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.